You ever have one of those days where everything just goes sideways and you end up doing something you never imagined? Yeah, well, last Thursday was one of those days for me. It started off normal, but by the time it was over, I was sharing my bed with a guy the first barely knew, and it was the most unexpected thing that's happened in my life in a long time. So, here's how it went down. I was at home, chilling in my crappy little one-bedroom apartment downtown. It's the kind of place where you can hear your neighbors sneeze through the walls and the pipes groan like they're about to explode. Nothing fancy, but it's mine, and I like it. I'd just finished binge watching some show I probably shouldn't admit to liking, and I was about to head out for a quick walk to clear my head because, honestly, work had been a nightmare all week. That's when my phone buzzed. It was a message from my neighbor, Jake, the guy who lives right across the hall. Jake and I have never been super close, but we say hi in the elevator and sometimes chat about the building's weird heating system or what takeout is good around here. You know, casual neighbor stuff. Anyway, his message was random, but something about it caught my attention. Hey man, can I crash at your place tonight? Locked myself out, and it's freezing out here. No spare key, and the landlord's out of town. Now I've had my share of locked out moments, but usually I'm the one calling a locksmith or climbing through a window because calling someone at midnight just feels awkward. But for Jake, I figured, why not? So I grabbed my coat and headed downstairs to find him standing there, shivering like a wet dog. He looked a little embarrassed, but also kind of relieved to see me. Jake's the kind of guy who's easy to talk to, tall, with those messy dark curls that look like they don't care, and this lopsided grin that makes you think he's about to say something clever or ridiculous. Honestly, I never really looked at him twice before, but now standing there, freezing in the hallway, he looked different. Vulnerable, maybe. I buzzed him into the building, and he followed me up to my apartment. The whole walk up the stairs was quiet, except for the sound of our footsteps and the heater struggling in the background. I was trying to act casual, but I couldn't help noticing how his eyes kept darting around the little space like he was soaking it all in. Then, just when I thought the night would be as simple as grabbing some blankets and letting him crash on the couch, Jake turned to me and said, "Actually, your bed's probably warmer, if you don't mind." And just like that, I found myself agreeing. Because, well, what else could I do? It was freezing cold outside, the couch wasn't exactly inviting, and something about the way he asked made it hard to say no. So here I am, sitting on the edge of my bed, trying to convince myself this is just a one-off neighborly favor. But the way Jake's laughter fills the room now, and how he's sprawled out like he belongs here, I can't help wondering if this night is going to change a lot more than just the temperature in my apartment. Jake kicked off his boots and flopped onto the bed like he'd been there 100 times before. I couldn't help but laugh at how quickly he made himself at home, which somehow made the whole thing feel less awkward. I grabbed a blanket from the closet and tossed it over him. He pulled it up, his eyes meeting mine with that same lopsided grin. "You're a lifesaver, man," he said, voice softer now, not the usual casual Jake I knew from the hallway. I shrugged, trying to play it cool, but honestly, I was glad to have company. It's weird how quiet my apartment usually is, like I'm the only person inhabiting the whole building half the time. Having Jake here made the place feel warmer, not just temperature dash-wise. We sat on opposite sides of the bed for a minute, and I wasn't sure what to say next. It's funny how two people can live in the same building for months but never really hang out until some random mishap forces you together. So, I finally said, "How did you even manage to get locked out? You live just across the hall, right?" Jake sighed, running a hand through his curls like it was a bad habit. "Yeah, I was rushing out this morning, late for work, and I thought, hey, I'll grab my keys from the kitchen counter later. Spoiler, I forgot, and then the door slammed behind me. Locked." I raised an eyebrow. "Classic," he chuckled, but then his smile faded a little. "It's been a weird week, honestly. Not just the lockout thing. Work's been a mess, and, I don't know, feels like everything's piling up." I nodded, feeling that too. Sometimes life just hits you with a series of small disasters that pile on, and you don't know where to catch a break. "I get that," I said. "Sometimes it's like the universe is just testing your patience." Jake looked at me, and there was this flicker of something in his eyes. Maybe relief that I got it, or maybe just the exhaustion from pretending everything was fine. For a moment, the only sound was the heater humming quietly. Then Jake's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it before slipping it into his pocket without a word. I guess he didn't want to talk about it. I cleared my throat and stood up to grab us both some water from the kitchen. As I poured the glasses, I felt like this night wasn't just about a locked door anymore. There was an undercurrent of something more, something neither of us was ready to name yet. When I handed Jake his glass, our fingers brushed for a second, and I caught myself staring a little longer than I should have. He looked up, and there was a softness there that made my heart beat a little faster. "Thanks," he said quietly. We sat back down on the bed, each with our own glass. The awkwardness had faded, replaced by a quiet comfort. "So," I said, trying to lighten the mood, "since you're stuck here, you're officially my couch surfing neighbor now. How does that feel?" Jake laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Better than I expected, honestly. Your place isn't half bad." "Thanks," I replied, smiling. "I clean once in a while." He nudged me playfully. "I believe you." We fell into a rhythm of easy conversation after that, talking about random stuff, favorite movies, dumb things we did as kids, that weird coffee shop down the street. Nothing heavy, but everything felt real. At some point, the night deepened, and the city noises outside quieted down. Jake looked over at me and said, "You know, this is probably the most fun I've had all week." I grinned. "Glad I can help with that." There was a pause before he said, "Can I be honest about something?" "Shoot." He hesitated, then looked down at his hands. "I think I've been avoiding talking to you because I wasn't sure how you'd take it. But I really like you. Like, more than just neighbors." My heart skipped. I wasn't expecting that. Not tonight, not like this. But hearing it out loud made something inside me click. "I like you too," I admitted, keeping my voice steady even though my insides were doing somersaults. Jake's eyes lifted, searching mine, and for a second, the world outside my apartment disappeared. There was no awkwardness, no locked doors or cold nights. Just us. He smiled and I reached out, brushing a stray curl off his forehead. It felt natural, like something that had been waiting to happen. "Looks like getting locked out wasn't such a bad thing after all," I said. Jake laughed softly. "Yeah, maybe it was the universe's way of telling us something." We stayed like that for a while, just talking and laughing quietly. The kind of night that feels like the start of something you didn't see coming, but maybe had been hoping for without knowing it. As I finally turned off the lights and settled in next to him, I realized that sometimes the best stories begin when you least expect them, like with a locked door and a stranger who ends up in your bed. Lying there in the dark, with Jake beside me, I felt this weird mix of nerves and comfort that I'd never really experienced before. I kept thinking about how strange it was that a locked door had thrown us together like this, like fate or dumb luck or whatever you want to call it, was messing with us in the best way possible. For a while, we just lay there, the quiet between us feeling less like silence and more like something charged, like we were both waiting for the next move but not rushing it. I could hear his steady breathing, and it kind of slowed down the whirlwind in my head. Then Jake shifted, nudging his shoulder against mine. "So, what now?" he asked quietly. I hesitated. Honestly, I didn't have a neat answer. But I knew I didn't want things to go back to the way they were. Just friendly hellos in the hallway and awkward elevator rides. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe we figure it out. Take it slow. See where this goes." He smiled in the dark, and I swear it was the most genuine thing I'd seen all week. "Yeah, I'd like that." We ended up falling asleep somewhere between talking and just being close. The bed was small, so we were practically spooning, and I felt this warmth that had nothing to do with the heater struggling in the background. It was the kind of warmth you don't expect just by sharing space with someone. Morning came too fast, sunlight sneaking around the edges of the curtains and hitting my face like a reminder that real life was waiting outside. I blinked a few times, trying to process where I was and why there was a guy in my bed who wasn't just some random sleep together. Jake was still asleep, curled up against me, and for a moment I just stared. Yesterday's weird, unexpected night suddenly felt like the start of something real. Eventually, Jake stirred and woke up with this sleepy grin. "Morning," he murmured. "Morning." I replied, still a little breathless from the fact that he was actually here. We didn't rush to talk about what happened or make awkward small talk. Instead, we just lay there, sharing the quiet morning, both of us knowing that the night had shifted something between us. At some point, hunger got the better of us. I suggested grabbing breakfast at the diner around the corner, and Jake agreed. We got dressed, him borrowing one of my sweaters because his clothes were still in his apartment, locked out and inaccessible, and headed out. The diner was exactly what you'd expect. Neon lights buzzing softly, the smell of coffee and frying bacon filling the air, and regulars in their usual booths chatting like it was the best place in the city. We slid into a booth near the window, and I watched Jake relax, this easy smile melting away the tension from the night before. "I'm glad you let me crash here," he said, stirring his coffee. "Me too," I admitted. I mean, not that I had much choice, but yeah, he laughed, then got a little serious. I guess I was nervous, about what you might think. But now, I don't want to hide it anymore. There it was again, the honesty, raw and unexpected. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. You don't have to hide. We spent breakfast talking about everything and nothing, the kind of conversation that feels like building a bridge between two people who've just found something worth holding on to. No pressure, no rushed confessions, just two guys trying to figure out how this new thing fits into their lives. Afterward, we wandered back to the building, and as we reached the door to Jake's apartment, the reality of the lockout came back. "Still no way in?" I asked. "Yeah, landlord's out of town for a few more days," Jake said with a shrug. "Guess I'm stuck with you for a little longer." I felt a grin spread across my face. "Looks like this could get interesting." He caught my eye, and there was this spark there. Hope, maybe, or something deeper. We stood there for a moment, the city buzzing quietly around us, and I realized that the locked door had opened so much more than just an apartment. Over the next few days, Jake kept crashing at my place. We settled into a rhythm, cooking terrible meals together, debating over which show to binge, and just hanging out in a way that felt natural. It was weird how fast the walls I'd built around myself started to crumble when he was around. One night, we were sprawled on the couch, watching some old movie that neither of us really cared about, when Jake reached over and laced his fingers with mine. "You're different from anyone I've ever known," he said softly. I looked at him, heart pounding. "You too." That night, I realized that sometimes the best stories aren't the ones you plan. They're the ones that happen when you're locked out, literally and figuratively, and someone unexpected walks right through the door you thought was closed forever. Weeks had passed since that night Jake got locked out, and somehow the awkwardness had morphed into something else entirely. We weren't just neighbors exchanging hellos anymore. We were more, but without labels or grand declarations. Just two guys figuring it out as we went along. One evening, I was sitting on my couch, scrolling aimlessly through my phone, when I heard the familiar buzz of someone at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, but it was Jake. He looked a little frazzled, like his day had been one of those relentless ones where nothing goes right. "Hey," he said, dropping his bag by the door. "Rough day?" I asked, patting the spot next to me. He flopped down, running a hand through his curls that had lost their usual curl in the humidity. "You could say that. Work was insane, and then I realized I left my phone charger at the office. Just my luck." I laughed. "Living on the edge without a charger, huh?" He smirked, but I could tell he appreciated the lightness. We settled into a comfortable silence for a moment, the kind that only happens when you're close enough not to feel the need to fill every second with words. "You know," Jake started, "I've been thinking a lot about that night. How something as dumb as being locked out led to all this." I looked over at him, curious. "All this?" He smiled, but there was a vulnerability behind it. "You. Us." I wasn't expecting it, but I'm glad it happened. It hit me then how much I'd come to rely on his presence. The late night talks, the way he somehow made my apartment feel less like a box and more like home. I reached out and took his hand, squeezing gently. "Me too," I said. "It's weird, but it feels right." Jake's eyes softened and he leaned his head on my shoulder. "I don't want to rush anything, but I'm tired of pretending I don't want this." I turned to face him fully, brushing a stray curl away from his forehead. "Neither do I." That night, we stayed up talking about everything and nothing. Our hopes, fears, the little things we'd never shared with anyone else. It felt like peeling back layers, revealing parts of ourselves that had been hidden away. Over the next few days, our connection deepened. We cooked dinner together, laughed over bad jokes, and found comfort in each other's company. It was simple, but it was real. One rainy afternoon, Jake knocked on my door, drenched from the storm but smiling like it was the best day ever. "Come on," he said, tugging me outside. "I have a surprise." We ran through the rain to the little park down the street. Jake pulled me under a big tree, shielding us from the worst of it. "I wanted to show you something," he said. Pulling out a small sketchbook from his bag, he flipped it open, revealing drawings, portraits of people, scenes from the city, moments captured with surprising detail and emotion. "These are amazing," I said, genuinely impressed. "You never told me you were an artist," he shrugged, cheeks coloring. "I'm not good enough to show anyone usually, but I wanted you to see." I looked up at him, feeling a surge of affection. "I'm glad you did." As the rain lightened, we stood there, soaked but happy, wrapped up in each other's warmth. That night, back at my place, Jake's phone buzzed. He glanced at it reluctantly. "Work calling?" I asked. He nodded. "Yeah, I think I need to set some boundaries." I nodded in agreement. "You deserve that." He smiled, resting his head on my chest. "Thanks for being here, for everything, always," I whispered. Lying there with him, I realized that sometimes the best things happen when you least expect them. A locked door, a chance encounter, and suddenly, you're not alone anymore. We had no idea where this would go, but for the first time in a long time, that felt okay. A few days after that rainy afternoon, things between Jake and me were settling into this easy, comfortable rhythm that felt like home. Not perfect, life never is, but good. We'd moved past the locked-out neighbor stage into something more genuine, more real. I could tell Jake was starting to let his guard down in a way that made me want to do the same. That Saturday morning, I woke up to sunlight, streaming through the blinds and the smell of coffee. I stumbled out of bed, still half asleep, and found Jake in the kitchen. He was fumbling with the coffee maker, that messy hair of his somehow looking even more endearing in the soft morning light. "Morning," I mumbled, rubbing the sleep out of my eyes. "Morning," he replied with that familiar grin. "Coffee's almost ready." I shuffled over to lean against the counter, watching him carefully measure the grounds. For some reason, seeing him in this quiet, domestic moment made my chest tighten. Maybe it was the way the ordinary felt extraordinary because it was with him. "So," Jake said, glancing up, "what's the plan for today?" I thought for a second. "Honestly, no idea. I was hoping you'd have some grand idea to get me out of the apartment." He laughed, the sound warm and easy. "Well, I was thinking we could check out that art exhibit I mentioned last week. It's at that little gallery a few blocks over. Should be fun." I nodded. "Sounds perfect." We spent the morning wandering through the gallery, surrounded by all kinds of artwork, from abstract paintings to photographs capturing candid moments in the city. Jake's eyes lit up when he saw a few pieces that reminded him of his sketches. I could tell this was his element, and watching him get excited about something so personal made me feel lucky to be there with him. Afterward, we grabbed lunch at a nearby cafe, sitting outside where the spring air was warm but not too hot. We talked about everything: the art, our families, stupid childhood memories. I felt like I was discovering new parts of Jake with every story he shared, and I wanted to keep learning. Later that afternoon, back at my place, things took a quieter turn. We were sitting on the couch, Jake resting his head on my shoulder, when I noticed a flicker of something beneath the surface, maybe hesitation. "Hey," I said softly, nudging him gently. "What's on your mind?" He looked up at me, eyes searching. I guess I'm still figuring out how to balance everything. Work, life, this, us. I nodded, understanding more than he probably realized. "Yeah, it's not always easy, but we're in it together, right?" Jake smiled, the sort of smile that made my heart skip. "Yeah, together." That night, as we lay in bed, our fingers intertwined, I thought about how far we'd come in such a short time. From a chance encounter when he got locked out, to this quiet closeness that felt like something worth holding on to. I wasn't sure what the future held, But I knew one thing for sure. I didn't want to face it without him. Not long after that night, things started to feel like they were on the cusp of changing again, but in a good way. You know when you can sense that something's about to shift? Just a little, but enough to make your heart race. That's how it was with Jake and me. One Friday evening, I was sitting at my desk, half-heartedly scrolling through emails when there was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I raised an eyebrow as I opened it to find Jake standing there, holding a beat-up little guitar case with this hopeful look on his face. "Hey," he said, tucking a curl behind his ear. "Got a minute?" "Of course," I said, stepping aside to let him in. Jake plopped down on the couch, guitar case in hand. "So I want to show you something. It's been a while since I played, but I've been working on a song." I was surprised but intrigued. "Really? You never mentioned you played guitar." He shrugged, cheeks coloring slightly. "It's something I did more when I was younger. Thought maybe sharing it with you would be, well, a good idea." There was this vulnerability in his voice that made me realize just how much trust he was putting in me. I smiled, feeling a mix of excitement and tenderness. "Play for me," I said. Jake took a deep breath and opened the case, pulling out the guitar. His fingers found the strings with an ease that told me he hadn't lost his touch. Then he started to play, softly at first, then building into a melody that was both raw and beautiful. As he sang, I felt something inside me unwind. The lyrics were honest, full of hope and quiet longing, like he was laying his heart bare with every word. I watched his face, the way his eyes closed occasionally, the slight tremble in his voice, and I knew I was witnessing something real. When the song ended, the room was thick with silence, the kind that feels too full for words. Wow, I finally breathed. "That was amazing." Jake shrugged off the compliment with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Thanks. It's been a while since I shared that with anyone." I reached over and took his hand, my thumb tracing circles on his skin. "You don't have to hide that side of you. Not with me." His smile grew a little softer and he squeezed my hand back. "I'm glad you're here." That night, as we talked about music, life, and everything in between, I felt our connection deepen in a way that was more than just physical comfort. It was emotional, something steady and real. A few days later, we found ourselves at a small open mic night at a nearby cafe, Jake's guitar slung over his shoulder. He'd convinced me to come along, even though I was nervous as hell. When it was his turn, he stepped up to the microphone, eyes briefly meeting mine before he started playing. The crowd was quiet, listening intently as his fingers danced over the strings, and his voice carried the song he'd written. Afterward, people came up to compliment him, but I noticed the way Jake held himself differently, as if he'd shed some kind of weight. Watching him that night, I realized how much courage it took to share himself like that, and I couldn't have been prouder. As we walked home under the city lights, Jake took my hand, weaving our fingers together naturally. "Thanks for being there," he said softly. "Always," I replied. Standing there with him, it hit me that sometimes the best things happen when you least expect them, like sharing your bed because of a locked door, then sharing your music, your fears, your hopes. And maybe, just maybe, sharing a future. After that open mic night, things between Jake and me felt like they'd taken on a new dimension. It wasn't just about hanging out or sharing space anymore. It was about truly seeing each other. I could tell he was starting to trust me more, and honestly, I was doing the same. It's funny how a locked door had cracked open something neither of us expected. A couple of nights later, I was sitting on my couch, headphones in, half listening to some playlist I'd made months ago, but never really revisited. My phone buzzed with a message from Jake. "You awake? I feel like talking." I smiled to myself and texted back, "Always awake for you." When he showed up at my door a few minutes later, he looked a little restless, like he had something on his mind that he wasn't sure how to say. We settled in on the couch, and after a few moments of comfortable silence, he finally spoke. "Can I tell you something kind of personal? Maybe a little scary?" I nodded, heart pounding a bit. "You can tell me anything." He took a deep breath. I've always been the guy who hides behind humor, or keeps people at arm's length. I guess I was afraid of getting close because, well, I've been hurt before. Like, really hurt. I reached over and took his hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "I get that, I've been there too. It's hard to open up when you're scared." Jake looked into my eyes, searching for some kind of reassurance. "But with you, it's different. I don't want to hide anymore. I want to try, even if it's scary. I felt this warmth spread through me, this mix of relief and hope. Me too. We can take it slow, but I'm here. He smiled, a real one this time, the kind that reaches the eyes. Thanks for being patient with me. We talked for hours that night, sharing stories we'd never told anyone else. Sometimes the words tumbled out in fits and starts, other times they flowed easily. But throughout it all, there was this unspoken promise that we'd face whatever came next together. A few days later, Jake invited me over to his apartment, finally, since he'd gotten the spare keys from the landlord. Walking through his place was like stepping into another part of his world. The walls were covered in sketches and photos, little pieces of his life scattered around in a way that felt personal and inviting. He showed me some of his recent drawings, explaining the stories behind them with that same passion he had when he played guitar. I realized I was lucky to be inside this space, seeing the parts of Jake he usually kept to himself. That night, we cooked dinner together, messy, imperfect, full of laughter and teasing, and ended up on the floor with takeout boxes and blankets, sharing a quiet intimacy that felt more real than anything I'd experienced before. As we lay there, side by side, Jake reached out and brushed a finger across my cheek. I'm glad you were there that night, when I got locked out. I think it was the start of something I needed. I smiled, my heart full. Yeah, sometimes the best things happen when you least expect them. He leaned in, and our lips met in a gentle, tentative kiss that quickly deepened. It wasn't flashy or dramatic, just two people finally letting down their walls. That night, as we fell asleep tangled together, I realized that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings lead to the most meaningful stories. And with Jake, I was ready to write whatever came next. One day, one moment, one small act of trust at a time. Months had passed since Jake got locked out that first night, and looking back, it felt wild how much had changed since then. What started as a simple neighborly favor had grown into something neither of us expected, but both of us needed. One quiet Sunday afternoon, we were sitting on my tiny balcony, the city humming softly around us. Jake had his sketchbook on his lap, doodling absent-mindedly, and I was scrolling through some old photos on my phone, but neither of us was really focused on anything. It was just comfortable, no pressure, no rush, just being together. He looked up and caught my eye. You ever think about how that night changed everything? I smiled, remembering the shivering guy on my doorstep, the awkwardness, the strange warmth that followed. Yeah. Funny how something small can flip your whole world. He chuckled and closed his sketchbook. I was so scared back then, of opening up, of trusting someone. But you made it easy, even when it wasn't. I reached over and took his hand. You made it easy for me too. I didn't realize how much I needed this. Someone who sees me. He squeezed my hand gently. We're lucky, huh? Yeah, I said, feeling a knot of gratitude in my chest. Really lucky. We sat there a while longer, the city alive but somehow distant. No grand declarations, no dramatic moments. Just two people who had found a quiet kind of love built on trust, patience, and small everyday things. That night, as we lay tangled in the sheets, I felt this deep sense of peace. It wasn't a perfect story, but it was ours. And sometimes that's more than enough. Sometimes all it takes is a locked door to open the right one.